What if everything you've ever called trauma is not a broken part of you, but an unopened doorway? What if the pain you've been running from your entire life is not chasing you, but calling you? And what if the deepest wounds you carry aren't asking to be erased, but transformed into something fierce, luminous, and unimaginably powerful? Most people spend their lives trying to silence the echoes inside them. They distract themselves, numb themselves, drown themselves in noise, entertainment, goals, relationships, validation, anything to avoid hearing the truth. There is a part of them that never healed, a part of them shouting from the inner wilderness, "Come back for me." Yet they keep moving, keep pushing forward, pretending they've outgrown their pain. But pain is patient. Trauma waits. It does not fade simply because time has passed. It hides in your habits, in your fears, in the way you love, the way you lose, the way you dream, the way you sabotage yourself right before something good enters your life. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The trauma you refuse to face becomes the architect of your destiny. This is why so many people feel out of place in their own bodies, why they can't explain the heaviness they carry, why their hearts feel older than their age. Trauma ages the soul. It fragments the psyche. And long before you ever learn words like healing, therapy, inner child, or shadow work, your spirit had already cracked into pieces, scattering across different moments in time. Today, I want to take you somewhere most people never dare to go. Not back into the memories, not into the story of what broke you, but into the ancient path that existed long before humans invented the word trauma. A path walked by shamans, mystics, visionaries, and seekers who understood something our modern world has forgotten. Pain is not the end. Pain is the portal. When shamans looked at a wounded person, they didn't ask, "What happened to you?" They asked, "Which part of you did you leave behind that day?" They believe trauma is not merely a psychological event, but a spiritual scattering. Your fear goes one way, your innocence another, your trust another, your courage another. And you, the part of you that remains, tries to live a full life with only a fraction of your original wholeness. Think about it. How much of you is actually you? And how much is the version molded by survival? When a child is wounded, they don't just cry, they hide. Parts of their spirit step out of the world, locking themselves in the memory where they last felt safe. And that same child grows up, becomes an adult, pays bills, falls in love, fails, tries again, grows older. But those hidden parts never return. They remain stuck in the timeline you abandoned them in. And then one day, without warning, life collapses. Something triggers you, shakes you, pulls you downward. Anxiety you can't explain, fear that makes no logical sense, emptiness that refuses to be filled. And you think you're falling apart, but in truth, you are being called back together. This is the moment the shamanic path opens. It does not open through logic. It does not open through intellect. It opens through a crack in your soul where light begins to leak in. It opens the moment you say, "I cannot keep living this way." It opens when suffering becomes a mirror, revealing that the life you've built might be standing on foundations you never chose. Modern healing tries to help you cope with the wound. Shamanic healing helps you find the part of you that disappeared when the wound occurred. It doesn't try to erase pain. It tries to reintegrate the self. It seeks to bring home every piece of you that trauma scattered across the landscape of your life. Imagine for a moment that your consciousness is not one continuous stream, but a vast forest filled with forgotten rooms, lost corridors, abandoned memories, and sleeping versions of you. Shamans believe that in the moment of unbearable pain, parts of your consciousness detach and move into these hidden places. And unless you consciously return to retrieve them, you live with an invisible absence within you, that emptiness you feel for no reason, that heaviness you carry even when life is going well, that sense of being disconnected from joy, that mysterious sadness that appears during quiet moments. These are not emotional states. These are lost fragments of your spirit trying to come home. And here's where the journey truly becomes strange and beautiful. The shamanic path doesn't ask you to intellectualize your pain. It asks you to experience your inner world. It asks you to travel within, to cross the threshold of your psyche, to listen not with your ears but with your intuition. It demands that you step beyond the rational mind and into the oldest realm humans have ever known, the realm of the soul. You see, trauma is not just stored in memory, it is stored in energy, in breath, in posture, in instinct, in dreams, in the places your mind refuses to go. And the shamanic journey is the art of walking into these inner territories with courage instead of fear. But courage doesn't mean strength. Courage means willingness. Willingness to sit with the parts of yourself you've abandoned. Willingness to hear the truth your mind has buried. Willingness to feel what your heart has avoided for years. The world has taught you that healing is about fixing, but ancient wisdom understood that healing is about retrieval. You cannot fix what happened. You cannot rewrite history. But you can call back the part of you that got lost in that history. You can re-enter the memory, not to relive it, but to guide your fragmented self out of it. And when that part returns, something incredible happens. Your voice changes, your posture shifts, your eyes soften, your mind becomes clearer. You begin to feel alive in a way you forgot was possible. A vitality rises from within you, not because your pain is gone, but because your spirit is whole. You begin to realize that the purpose of trauma was never to break you. It was to initiate you, to push you onto a deeper path, to awaken a dimension of wisdom you never would have discovered otherwise. To force you to meet your soul in a way comfort never could. Most people think they're healing when they're merely surviving. But you, if you're listening to this, if something inside you is stirring, if you feel that strange mixture of fear and curiosity rising in your chest, you're not surviving. You're being summoned. You're being called back to yourself. And this is just the beginning. The calling does not arrive as a voice or a vision. It arrives as a shift inside your being, subtle at first, like the faint stirring of something ancient, awakening beneath layers of time. It pulls you inward, asking you to move through territories that were once too overwhelming to face. The world around you remains unchanged, yet everything within you begins to rearrange itself. You start noticing how certain memories no longer terrify you, but whisper to you. How emotional wounds you once buried now sit closer to the surface, not as threats, but as guides. The familiar heaviness you carried for years starts changing texture, becoming less like a weight and more like a compass pointing toward the places where your missing pieces wait. On this path, the self you have pretended to be slowly dissolves. The self built from expectations, from survival patterns, from inherited fears and silent agreements begins to crumble. You feel the dismantling happening in real time, not as destruction but as revelation. The truth of who you are cannot rise until the version of you built around your wounds falls away. Every layer that collapses reveals something older, something truer, something untouched by the events that hurt you. And as these layers fall, you start to sense that what you once called pain may have actually been the doorway back to your essential nature. There is a point in this journey where the boundaries of past and present blur. You begin to see that the child you once were, the teenager you struggled to understand, the adult you became, and the person you are becoming now are not separate beings, but expressions of the same inner consciousness. You feel them living inside you, waiting for recognition, waiting to be acknowledged by the awareness that now has the strength to witness them without collapsing. You become the space in which all these versions of yourself can finally breathe. And as they breathe, you breathe with them, creating a rhythm of reconnection that shakes the dust off the forgotten doors of your inner world. The deeper you walk, the more you realize trauma did not only take pieces of you, it also left behind wisdom encoded in emotional patterns, in instincts, in the way you respond to the world. And now, instead of avoiding these patterns, you begin to read them. The anger that once consumed you becomes a map to boundaries you never learned to set. The sadness that hollowed you becomes a doorway to empathy. The fear that paralyzed you becomes a guide that leads you toward the parts of yourself still waiting to return. Nothing inside you is meaningless. Nothing inside you is random. Everything becomes a symbol, a sign, a message written in the language of your own psyche. As this realization deepens, the shamanic path reveals its true nature. It is not about rituals or costumes or mysticism. It is about awareness, an awareness so deep that it allows you to move through your inner world with the same clarity and presence that ancient seekers cultivated when they explored the boundaries between the seen and unseen realms. You begin to walk into memories not as a victim, not as a frightened observer, but as a traveler reclaiming lost territory. You walk into sensations stored in the body and listen to them. You walk into the silence between your thoughts and begin to understand that it is not emptiness at all, but a vast inner landscape waiting to be explored. The journey brings you into contact with parts of yourself that speak not in words but in symbols. Images appear in your mind, not visions, but intuitions made visible. You might sense the presence of a figure representing your courage, or feel the movement of an inner energy shaped like an animal, guiding you toward forgotten strength. These are not hallucinations. They are metaphors made alive by your subconscious, carrying truths your conscious mind cannot articulate. As you interact with them, something within you begins to realign. You feel your identity stretching, expanding, adjusting to the return of the pieces you abandoned long ago. Slowly, your inner world begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a place of pilgrimage. You start moving through your memories with the tenderness of someone cleaning a sacred space. The moments that once overwhelmed you lose their sharpness. Not because they disappear, but because you now stand in them with all the parts of yourself that were missing when the wound occurred. You step back into old pain with new power, and in doing so, you rewrite the energy of the memory. The past cannot change, but the you who stands in that past can. And when the self changes, the meaning of the memory changes with it. Piece by piece, your inner world becomes a home again. The fragments that were once scattered begin gravitating toward you as if recognizing their rightful place. They return quietly, without drama, without resistance. A forgotten confidence returns first, subtle but undeniable. Then a forgotten joy awakens, stretching like a limb that has been numb for years. A forgotten innocence follows, not naive but wise, carrying the purity of a soul no longer defined by pain. With each return, you feel more substantial, more grounded, more present in your own existence. This transformation is not visible to others at first. From the outside, you still look like the same person. But inside, something profound is taking shape. You feel the shift when you wake up and the world no longer feels as heavy. You feel it when your breath sinks deeper into your body, no longer obstructed by the tension you used to carry. You feel it when situations that once triggered you now pass through you like wind through an open window. You feel it when your thoughts lose their frantic pace and settle into quiet clarity. The change becomes undeniable when life challenges you again. And instead of collapsing, you respond with strength you didn't know you had. As more pieces return, the distance between your inner and outer selves begins to close. You find yourself speaking with a voice that feels authentic, making decisions that align with your truth rather than your fears, choosing connections that nourish your soul rather than reinforce your wounds. You start living from a place of integration, not fragmentation. You start acting from a place of depth, not survival. You start seeing the world not through the lens of what hurt you, but through the lens of what you have reclaimed. There comes a moment when you realize that the journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. The essence that existed before the pain, before the fear, before the fragmentation, the essence that was never lost, only hidden. And as this essence rises, it brings with it a strength that does not shout but radiates, a wisdom that does not preach but understands, a clarity that does not demand but reveals. The deeper you embody this return, the more the world around you begins to shift in response. You see people differently, not just their actions, but their wounds, their fragmentation, their unspoken longing for wholeness. You recognize the survival patterns in others that once dominated your own life. You see how fear shapes entire personalities and how unresolved pain drives entire generations. But instead of reacting to these patterns, you witness them with the calm awareness of someone who has walked through their own fire. Compassion replaces judgment. Understanding replaces resentment. Presence replaces reaction. This path does not remove the struggles of life, but it changes your relationship with them. Challenges no longer feel like threats, but opportunities to integrate deeper. Pain no longer pushes you away from yourself, but pulls you further inward. The world no longer feels like an enemy, but a mirror, reflecting the places where you are still returning home. Every experience becomes meaningful. Every emotion becomes a doorway. Every moment becomes part of the path. You are no longer surviving your life. You are living it from its center. And as you stand in this emerging wholeness, you sense that the journey is not ending. It is unfolding layer by layer, drawing you into dimensions of yourself that were inaccessible when you were fragmented. You feel the presence of something vast in your being, something ancient, something wise, something that has always been guiding you from within, waiting for the day you would finally have the strength to listen. And now, at last, you are listening. You begin to feel that what's awakening inside you is not merely healing, but evolution. A new center of gravity forms within your consciousness, steady and luminous, untouched by the chaos that once dictated your life. This center is not an emotion, not a belief, not a thought. It is presence, a presence that watches everything without being consumed by anything. You sense that this presence has been waiting beneath your trauma all along, like a hidden flame protected under layers of ash, rising the moment you uncover what was buried. And as it rises, the world around you feels less threatening because the world within you is no longer fragmented. There is something extraordinary that takes shape when inner fragmentation dissolves. Your perception sharpens. You start noticing moments that were once invisible to you. Tiny gestures of kindness, subtle shifts of intuition, fleeting sparks of inspiration. These small signals become guiding lights, reminding you that your consciousness is expanding into places that were once locked behind walls of fear. You realize you're no longer reacting to the world from your wounds. You responding from an inner fullness that feels quietly indestructible. Every breath carries a new quality of clarity. Every step feels anchored. Every decision feels aligned with a truth that is older than your suffering. And then, without warning, a deeper shift happens. The timeline of your life stops feeling like a straight line of events and begins to feel like a living organism. The past no longer pulls you backward. The future no longer overwhelms you. You exist in a widening present, a space where awareness stretches across your entire being. You feel your younger self walking toward you through memory. You feel your older self watching you with silent encouragement. You sense them merging within you, forming a single unified consciousness that understands your journey with astonishing depth. You become the meeting point of every version of yourself that ever existed, and every version still waiting to emerge. This integration brings with it an unfamiliar stillness, not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of alignment, a stillness that doesn't remove emotion, but holds it gently, allowing everything to pass through you without sticking to the corners of your mind. You feel your nervous system adjusting, releasing tension it held for years. You feel your heart expanding, not with sentimental emotion, but with an open, grounded acceptance that radiates outward effortlessly. People around you begin to notice without knowing what changed. They sense something different in your presence, a calm intensity, a depth that cannot be faked, a grounded energy that speaks louder than words. As this presence deepens, something precious returns, your imagination. Not fantasy, not distraction, but the raw, creative force that trauma once shut down. You begin to envision new possibilities for your life, not as escapes, but as natural expressions of your evolving self. Your mind unlocks pathways you never allowed yourself to explore. You start dreaming again, not in the way you once did, trying to outrun your pain, but in a way that aligns with who you are becoming. Your dreams stop being a refuge and start becoming a blueprint for the life waiting for you on the other side of your transformation. There is a moment in every profound inner journey where the past stops being a prison and becomes a teacher. This moment doesn't arrive dramatically, it arrives quietly when you least expect it. One day you revisit a memory that once haunted you, and instead of collapsing into it, you watch it from a distance. You see the child or the younger version of yourself inside that memory, not as a victim, but as a part of your lineage of becoming. You feel compassion instead of fear. You feel understanding instead of shame. And in that moment, the memory loses its power over you because you're no longer looking at it through the eyes of the one who was wounded. You're looking at it through the eyes of the one who has returned. This shift changes everything. The world inside you stops being divided into before the pain and after the pain. You understand that all of it, every scar, every heartbreak, every collapse, was shaping you into someone capable of holding a deeper, richer, more expansive form of consciousness. You stop wishing for a different past. You stop regretting the years you spent lost. Those years weren't wasted. They were alchemical. They were rearranging you from the inside, preparing you for a life lived from wholeness rather than survival. And as this realization sinks into your being, an inner strength awakens, quiet, steady, and unmistakably real. This strength expresses itself in the smallest moments. When someone speaks to you with anger, you no longer absorb their chaos because you no longer resonate with it. When fear arises, it moves through you like a wave that no longer finds a place to anchor. When old triggers appear, you meet them with the awareness of someone who has walked the labyrinth of their own psyche and emerged with the map. You no longer fear your own mind. You no longer fear your past. You no longer fear collapsing back into old versions of yourself, because you know how to guide yourself through any darkness you encounter. You start noticing that your intuition becomes incredibly sharp. Choices that once confused you now feel obvious. The difference between what nourishes you and what drains you becomes clear without effort. You begin to trust yourself in ways you never could before, because trust is born from wholeness. When you were fragmented, self-trust was impossible. Now, as you gather yourself piece by piece, trust becomes your natural state. You trust your emotions because you understand them. You trust your instincts because they no longer come from fear. You trust your path because you feel it unfolding from within, not imposed from outside.
This phase of awakening also brings a new kind of solitude, not loneliness, but a spaciousness within yourself.
You no longer cling to people to avoid feeling empty. You no longer lose yourself in relationships. You can sit in silence without seeking distraction because the silence is no longer threatening. It has become a sanctuary, a place where you meet your truest self without noise, without expectation, without fear. And in this sanctuary, insights rise naturally. You begin to understand your patterns from the inside out. You see how certain experiences were not random, but part of a larger movement within your psyche. You begin to access wisdom that feels older than your lifetime, a wisdom that emerges from the depth of your integrated consciousness. As your inner world stabilizes, your outer world begins to reflect it. You find yourself drawn toward environments that resonate with your inner clarity. You seek simplicity rather than chaos. You create rather than escape. You form relationships based on truth rather than trauma bonds. You protect your energy without guilt. You establish boundaries without conflict. You choose experiences that expand your spirit instead of repeating old wounds. Life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you are participating in fully. The person you are becoming stands at the crossroads of infinite possibilities. The fragmentation that once scattered you is no longer shaping your destiny. The fear that once dictated your choices has lost its authority. The identity built from survival no longer holds power over you. Every part of your being begins to move in the same direction, aligned, coherent, unified. And as your inner coherence grows, your external reality rearranges itself to match it. Opportunities that once seemed impossible now appear naturally. Paths that were previously blocked open effortlessly. Conversations, encounters, decisions, and moments flow with an ease you once believed was reserved for other people. This phase of the journey reveals something profound. The path to wholeness is not a single breakthrough, but a slow, steady emergence. It is not dramatic, it is cellular. It happens in the subtle ways you carry your body, the way your breath falls into rhythm, the way your mind becomes quiet in situations that once overwhelmed you. It happens in the softening of your face, the grounding of your presence, the steadiness in your gaze. It happens when you realize you are no longer fighting life, but moving with it. You begin to sense that the transformation underway inside you is not just psychological, but existential. Something deep within you is rearranging its relationship with reality. You start interacting with the world as someone who has found their inner axis, their inner voice, their inner truth. This truth doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply exists, and its existence is enough to shift the entire trajectory of your life. And as this truth settles into your bones, a new chapter awaits. One shaped not by the fragments of who you were, but by the wholeness of who you are becoming. And so you arrive at that strange frontier where the inner world and the outer world blur into one unbroken field of awareness, where everything you once believed to be separate begins dissolving into a single shimmering continuity. You begin to sense that life was never divided into compartments. It was you who built those walls, name by name, fear by fear, habit by habit. And now, standing here, you feel the old partitions loosening, trembling, as if waiting for your permission to fall. Something ancient and wordless stirs in you. Something that remembers what it means to move through existence without the heavy armor of who you thought you needed to be. It whispers that the world was never trying to defeat you, it was trying to wake you. You understand now that the subtle ache you carried for years was not a sign of weakness, but a signal. A beacon from a deeper intelligence urging you to look beyond the surfaces you were taught to trust. The surfaces were only reflections, distorted mirrors shaped by other people's fears, expectations, and unexamined stories. And you, for the longest time, tried to fit into those reflections as if they were sacred truths. But now you see the odd humor in it all. You see that life was quietly nudging you to stop performing roles you never auditioned for and to finally inhabit the one role only you could play, the unfiltered, unmasked version of yourself. Yet as this recognition crystallizes, the world around you doesn't suddenly become easier. What happens instead is more profound. The world becomes honest, brutally honest at times, beautifully honest at others, but always honest. There is something liberating in that honesty, something terrifying too, because it demands participation rather than passive observation. It asks you to stop waiting for signs and to become the sign, to stop looking for the path, and to realize that you are generating the path with every breath, every choice, every thought that ripples through the unseen architecture of your mind. You begin to feel the gravitational pull of your own potential, a quiet but steady force drawing you away from the repetitive cycles you once mistook for stability. You see that those repetitions were cages, comfortable, familiar cages, but cages nonetheless. And you understand that the discomfort you used to run from was not a threat. It was the friction created when your growing self pushed against those shrinking boundaries. Growth, you realize, is not a smooth ascension, but a series of shedding events. And each shedding feels like loss until you recognize it as release. As this awareness deepens, you notice how perception itself begins to shift. You no longer see life as a linear sequence of events moving from one point to another. Instead, you sense it as a vast, pulsating network of possibilities unfolding in multiple directions simultaneously. Every moment feels dense with potential. Every choice feels like a silent collaboration between the visible and the invisible. You start to perceive meaning where previously you saw coincidence, patterns where previously you saw chaos, invitation where previously you saw indifference. The universe reveals itself as an intricate intelligence, playful in its mystery, ruthless in its precision, endlessly patient in its guidance. But the most surprising realization is not about the universe, it is about you. You discover that the same intelligence shaping galaxies also animates your awareness. That the same force that curves starlight also curves your intuition. You sense the profound symmetry between the cosmos outside and the cosmos within. And you begin to move through the world with a kind of reverence you never knew you could feel. Not the reverence of dogma or discipline, but the reverence of recognition. Recognition that everything you encounter is a facet of the same vast process you yourself are woven into. With this perception, the struggles you once magnified begin to shrink into their proper scale. The doubts that used to paralyze you lose their authority. The fears that once dictated your limits transform into signposts pointing to the next frontier of your evolution. You see that fear was never an enemy, but a misinterpreted compass, and that courage was never the absence of fear, but the decision to move anyway. You start moving differently, less like someone trying to avoid pain and more like someone seeking truth. And truth, you discover, is always found at the edge of what feels comfortable. This shift creates a quiet revolution within you. People around you sense it even before you speak. Your presence changes. Your silence changes. Your attention sharpens into something almost electric. You stop engaging in conversations that drain your spirit and start gravitating toward experiences that expand it. You no longer tolerate the dulling of your own consciousness. You become protective of your energy, not out of selfishness, but out of clarity. You understand that what you feed your mind becomes the architecture of your reality. And you refuse to build a prison when you are capable of building a cathedral. Slowly, you begin reclaiming pieces of yourself you abandoned long ago. The curiosity you buried under responsibilities. The creativity you silenced to appear practical. The wonder you suppress to appear mature. These dormant aspects of your being resurface like long-lost companions returning home. You welcome them without hesitation, realizing that maturity was never about killing your inner fire. It was about learning how to carry it without burning yourself. You realize that the world does not need a more obedient version of you. It needs a more awake version of you. As these rediscovered parts integrate, your inner world becomes richer, more textured, more vibrant. You start to experience time differently, not as something slipping away, but as something unfolding through you. You find yourself lingering in moments you used to rush past, noticing details you used to overlook, feeling emotions you used to suppress. You begin to understand that presence is not a technique, but a consequence of dropping the illusions that fragmented your attention. When those illusions fall away, presence arises naturally, like the sky revealing itself when the clouds drift apart. And in that presence, you feel something you haven't felt in a long time, alignment. The sense that your thoughts, your actions, your intentions, and your deeper knowing are moving in the same direction. When you speak, your words carry weight. When you act, your actions carry precision. When you dream, your dreams carry purpose. You begin to trust yourself, not blindly, but deeply. The inner conflict that once defined you dissolves into coherence. You realize that what you once called motivation was merely the attempt to force movement without alignment, and that true movement happens effortlessly when alignment is restored. With alignment comes a new form of discipline, not the discipline of struggle, but the discipline of devotion. You become devoted to your own evolution, devoted to the cultivation of your own awareness, devoted to the unfolding of your own potential. You stop abandoning your path when it becomes difficult because you understand that difficulty is a signal of nearing transformation. You develop the ability to sit with discomfort without collapsing into it, to walk through uncertainty without shrinking from it, to face yourself without flinching. You discover that the most powerful version of you is not the one who avoids challenge, but the one who transforms challenge into fuel. Gradually, the world begins responding to this transformation, not because the world changed, but because your perception of it did. Opportunities that once felt distant begin appearing with uncanny timing. People who resonate with your frequency enter your life effortlessly. Paths that once seemed blocked reveal hidden corridors. You sense that you are no longer pushing against the flow of existence, but moving with it. Life starts feeling less like a battlefield and more like a dialogue, a dynamic conversation between your intention and the universe's response. And this is where the final realization emerges, not with fanfare, not with revelation, but with a quiet certainty that settles into your bones. You understand that the journey was never about becoming something more. It was about remembering something essential, remembering that you are not a fragment of the universe, you are an expression of it, not an observer of reality, a participant in its creation, not a seeker of meaning, a generator of it. And once you see this, truly see it, everything that once terrified you becomes fuel, everything that once confused you becomes direction, everything that once wounded you becomes wisdom. You stand now not as the person shaped by your past, but as the architect of your future. You recognize that the power you were searching for was always within you, waiting for permission to emerge. And as you give it that permission, as you claim your place in the unfolding mystery of your own becoming, you realize something extraordinary. You were never lost. You were never broken. You were simply preparing for the moment you're living right now, the moment you finally step into the full, unfiltered magnitude of who you were always meant to become. And that is where the journey transforms into something larger than your own life. Something that radiates beyond your personal story, something that touches the fabric of the collective human experience. Your evolution becomes a lighthouse for others still wandering in their own darkness. Your courage becomes a map for those who have forgotten their direction. Your presence becomes a reminder that awakening is not only possible, it is inevitable for those who persist. So you walk forward now, not as a seeker, not as a survivor, but as a creator, a living proof that human consciousness can rise, transform, and transcend, a testament that even the deepest confusion can become clarity, even the darkest night can become illumination, even the most fractured identity can become wholeness. You walk forward with the understanding that every breath is a chance to realign with your purpose. Every moment a doorway to expansion, every choice an act of creation. And in that understanding, you step fully, fearlessly, magnificently into the truth you were meant to live. The universe is not happening to you, it is happening through you. And now at last you are ready to let it.